and welcome to the Open Era Podcast. My name is Devang and I'm joined, as always, by Mr. Simon Bushell. Bush, summer has arrived early in Toronto, at least for a week, and man, oh man, was it well needed after 70,000 weeks of gray in a row. Feels nice. I'm wondering how you're doing in Vancouver.
Well, I usually come on this podcast and I'm bragging about how much better it is here on the West Coast. That is not the case here. It's been extremely cold and extremely wet. So enjoy this friendly rivalry, the advantage while you have it.
Love weather chat. But no, it was great. I was sweating a lot this week, and not just for being out of shape, but because the sun is out and I'm still wearing a jacket and stuff. But it was a lovely blast. And also watching a lot of the sunlight coat Monte Carlo when it wasn't raining was a reminder that spring, summer is around the corner. Some big tournaments are around the corner. But as an opener, as a tester, perhaps, of what's to come in the clay season, I thought this was pretty great, Monte Carlo. Bush. Overall, we'll get into the specifics, but just as a tournament in itself and the way it progressed, no notes. That was pretty cool.
As a 10 days or 9 days or whatever it ran to in total, it was pretty entertaining to watch all of it. There were some high quality matches. I think we got a really good look at what the field's going to look like in this clay court season. But potentially, let me ask you a question. How much do you enjoy backhand rallies cross courts for 20 strokes in a row? Because that's what you're going to get a lot of.
Yeah, it really depends which backhands, right? It really depends. Not all are created equal, and there's something to be said for a war of attrition, but I do find it interesting that a lot of these courts are identified as not being the same, and the Monte Carlo clay doesn't indicate that you're going to be successful in Rome or Paris, just like winning in Madrid isn't indicative that you're going to maybe dominate as well at the French Open. But Monte Carlo has its own kind of, I think, aura and its mystique, and it's perhaps because it's held at the site of the richest people on earth, like that's their country club, and it's just always known and noticeable that this is a place for the elite to come and cavort and gallivant around. And yet for 10 days we get to see some pretty high level tennis, and thanks to the rain we got to see people get really close who might not be able to get that close at an event like this, which I thought was kind of cool.
The only thing that was missing this week was some form of protest against the massive inequities in society. Perfect tournament to try and do that at.
Literally the best place to do this, as the court is Ranier the Third, because anytime you have something the third, this is a naming convention.
Slightly problematic.
Nepo baby much? Come on, all right.
A fail son, if you will.
The big story, Andrey Rublev winning his first Masters 1000 title. A long wait is over, and I think for the most part, a lot of people, at least on our Discord, were cheering for Andrey Rublev to get this done. It did not look like it was going to happen at several points, though, Bush, against Holger Rune on this final, on Sunday. The full Rublev experience, though, and for once we saw someone melt down a bit harder than he did. And to call him old is a bit rich, but I think you saw mature Rublev kind of let someone else carry the show or carry the theater aspect and kind of just do his thing, especially in the third set.
Well, I guess the more important question here is, were they cheering for Andrey Rublev or cheering against Holger Rune? This is the real question. Excellent question. Struggling to come to terms with this morning, having watched that final. I think probably for Rublev. I think we can probably net out and say that's true, even though there was a hell of a lot of hate directed towards this young, precocious talent. Get used to it, Dev. He's going to be at the back end of these clay court tournaments a lot in the next 10 years. I think
Holger,
if this is any indication.
Holger, you're talking.
This is Holger, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, unfortunately. But to touch on Rublev, I'm really pleased for him trying to finally getting over the line. It's one of those that it's been a long time coming. That final was really kind of fascinating because he didn't really do anything at the back end to win it. He just put the ball in play, and Rune kind of just fell apart. I thought it was interesting when Rune was up and he had that break of serve in the third set. He got a bit cocky, I thought.
Yeah.
I thought he went away from his game and tried to play some shots where I was just thinking, like, it doesn't seem on at the moment. Like, your opponent's not that far away from him, and he's not gone away to the point where I feel like you can be hitting some of these shots. And it came back and bit him in the ass, Dev.
Yeah, and I think it flipped really quickly, right? He's up 4-1. He's about to break Rublev again, probably, and end the match. And he doesn't do that. And his reaction to that, maybe I shouldn't be surprised. He's 19 years old. But I was like, what are you doing? Like, why are you so upset? Why are you talking to yourself at this point in the match when, I mean, for the most part, you've been in the driver's seat. I think Rublev kind of literally just waited for him to make mistakes and implode at certain junctures of the match, and it worked. And I'm fascinated by this because Andrey's must have seen this so many times in his career, but he's on the other side of it, where he's the one kind of going through it. The crowd thing, I think he even commented in his trophy ceremony, in the acceptance speech, he said, being from a country where I am, to have so much international support means a lot. That is a bit fascinating to consider. You know, Andrey Rublev does represent Russia. I know they took the flag away, but I wonder if the Holger Rune dislike runs that strong, because throughout the tournament, as you mentioned, including very much so in that Jannik Sinner match, the crowd was against him. And I think as a 19-year-old, it's a bit strange to consider that someone this young could be maybe public enemy number one on the tour, but it's kind of how this has developed. And it's kind of why I think everyone was doubly happy on Sunday, not just to see Rublev get his first really big title, but to see Rune maybe get a reality check of sorts, considering he's won one of these big titles already. Rublev also saying, "You're too freaking young, man," talking to Rune in his trophy speech. And he is really good for being that young, but I think there's some things that he doesn't possibly get about, like interactions and how he could be perceived as not being someone to be beloved. His interactions with the chair umpire in that semifinal as well, I think, were a fascinating glimpse into like things he doesn't understand, or like things he doesn't see why it's an issue. Like when he hit Sinner the second time by accident, I'm doing the air quotes thing, but Sinner obviously pissed off, and he's like, I don't understand why he's mad. I'm like, oh, okay, Holger.
It takes quite an achievement to piss off Jannik Sinner, doesn't it? Especially when he's so calm and unflappable, and usually in these situations. I think Rune's interesting because there's like that countercultural element to him, in the sense that if someone is railing against the structures of society and come out and being a tennis bad boy in that regard and speaking the truth, it's one thing. But the kid just seems like a prick, which, and I think it's the explanation of why he's disliked, is that he doesn't seem particularly nice. So I think there's, on one hand, right, people can love you and can take on that love if you're presenting a certain way. But in this case, he just doesn't seem like a particularly nice person to want to cheer for.
This is the interaction with Carlos Fernandez I was referring to. It's like, so Holger wins a point, does the shush to the crowd, and the umpire's like, Holger, you're not helping with this, please. And he wins the next point and does the hand behind the ear gesture, which just doubles on top of it. I'm not going to lie, Bush. Part of me loves that. I absolutely love it. And I understand how that can come across as being a prick and maybe not being respectful, but it's a fine line. And I do want to, he's made some mistakes clearly throughout his young career. And we've identified and talked about quite a few of them, but something about him, man. And there's something about maybe just on the tennis side, the pure tennis side, the pace he can generate, the shots he chooses to play. I think his ability to drop shots Sinner to death, basically, he's got all the tools in his bag, man. And especially on this surface, like you mentioned, he's going to be at the final end of a lot of these tournaments.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting that his comparison, when people are looking at his comparison, is Carlos Alcaraz. I think that's just the funniest thing, right? To compare him to one of his own peers. But I just think they're the same player. They look identical to me when I see them play out there. I think Alcaraz is a better player than him, but my goodness, if he's 95% of what Carlos Alcaraz is, he's going to be at the back end of so many tournaments for the next 10 years. And I think in a lot of ways, it's going to be really interesting to see how he does throughout this clay court season, because he's very, very good on clay. His statistics back that up, that he's a much better clay court player than he is a hard court player. So, like, honestly, if we sit here in a month's time or in 6 weeks' time and the final of the French Open is Holger Rune against Carlos Alcaraz, it would not shock me at all.
Totally agree. I'm curious what you think of this, and I saw this float across my timeline, but if Sinner and Alcaraz will be the new Roger and Rafa, Holger Rune is the new Novak Djokovic?
No. I actually...
it's doing a lot of work for Jannik Sinner. I've got to say, as much as I love the guy, I'm like, okay.
I think Jannik Sinner, I think the closest comparison, like in that scenario of Jannik Sinner, is Andy Murray. If you really want to look at how that rounds out, is that you can see him eventually getting to world number one, like having driven himself to absolute despair and gone through the grind when he's like 28 years old and is still like
2 to 4 existential crises along
exactly.
the way. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Can we just round out the Rublev and Rune thing, just looking at their runs to the final and what they did this week, just seeing like Rublev won this title on merit. Like I don't think anyone can argue against that. Beating Munar, Kachanov, Struff, Fritz, and Rune in the run is, I mean, that's a good field to win at a Masters. But the run I thought that Rune had as well was astonishing. Admittedly, the walkover against Berrettini, you can chalk that up to whatever it was. But beating Thiem, beating Medvedev, beating Sinner, and then losing in the final to Rublev, like this is no joke at all. Like, and his runs that he's won or got to the finals of the 2 Masters events that he's been in, he has shown that he is a very, very dangerous player and capable at this young age as well.
I thought the Fritz match as well. You kind of saw Rublev respond after dropping the first set. You also saw Rublev kind of let Taylor Fritz have a bit of a mental lapse himself. And especially towards the end of that match, you felt that Taylor Fritz was barely in it, which it's kind of weird to see from him, at least in recent days. But Rublev stuck to the plan. He's a mature 25 years old, Bush. And again, looking at his career statistics, you're kind of surprised he hasn't done as much as maybe he should have or could have at this juncture. Like I said, his first 1,000 series title, but farthest he's gone at a slam is the quarterfinals. And a lot of people would love to see that change at the French Open, but this is the time, right? And I think the most we've talked about him in recent years was how many lower titles he was scooping up and what that would mean maybe for his prospects at the bigger tournaments. He got to the final 2 years ago, didn't win there, but the crowd loved him then. This time around, he does do it. He's a bit more senior. He's been through the ringer, a bit more mature, and he's still himself in the way that I think allows him to play his best game. I think Rublev off the court remains just a boon for the ATP, just in all of the content I watch. So I think it's fascinating to see how he's kind of blending these two sides of himself together in a positive way.
Well, herein lies the rub, is it not? Is that he is actually incredibly entertaining and someone that I think is very marketable and very relatable and very raw, I think. And I think that came across obviously in his post-match victory speech. But he's also from Russia, and that presents real issues in terms of how this player is presented.
How did you know that without the flag being beside his name?
Maybe I'm too deep into this, Dev.
Wow.
I don't know if you know this, but I do watch
Mr.
quite a
School,
lot of tennis.
Mr. University striking again. Jeez Louise. I wanted to play the sound from Tennis Channel reaction to the final. Tennis Channel with arguably their best lineup I've seen in some time, and that involved Chris Eubanks being on a lot of the coverage, but Andy Roddick also called it for this post-match talk. And I just wanted to play Andy's comments on Rublev here.
It's just every time he speaks, it's so raw, and as a player, it's relatable, because I think we all put it forward this false bravado a lot of the times, and for our own protection, for whatever it is, we try to create a certain narrative around ourselves, and it just doesn't seem like he cares. He's just going to tell us exactly what he thinks. He's going to say, okay, well, priority, and then he goes from like, I'm super professional, like I'm going to tell you what needs to happen. Right. What am I going to do after this? Well, I still have to play next week. I have to go get some treatment. And then once we've kind of accepted that and gone, oh, okay, so there is a professional thing, he goes, or maybe get drunk. I don't know. So it's just, the way he ebbs and flows through an interview, especially we're approaching this vacuum kind of post Roger, Serena. We don't know if, we've definitely seen the healthiest days of Rafa, right? We're going to have this vacuum, and the more that we can fill that vacuum with kind of individual personalities that can create stardom, the better we are as a sport. This is just great. Every time he talks, I find myself laughing.
Shouts to Kamil and Josh for posting that in the Discord. I found that fascinating for a couple of reasons, but what you mentioned before, we played that clip, which is a huge thing. It's like individual athletes without ties to any nation. We need to rally around them and market them. It's like, yeah, we could do this. We could do this if you're all really down with it. You should be. I think you saw Daniil Medvedev be the other guy this week who's like, yeah, he gets it. He gets several parts of it. He's also from that country without a flag, though.
I mean, the thing that stood out to me more than anything else is bravado.
Bravado? Bravado? Is it bravado? Eastern Texas.
Maybe I'm the fool here. Maybe there is a different pronunciation of it, but that one really threw me. I had to figure out what he was trying to say for a second there.
Just had to bring down Andy Roddick. There's a lot more to get to, I think, from Monte Carlo. But if we wanted to end maybe on Rublev and maybe kind of looking at the landscape of the top right now, and we'll talk about some of the other guys that are involved in some of the hoopla this week. But Nadal's not going to play Barcelona. Nadal, by all accounts, he might show up at Roland Garros and be something, be the husk of what he once was, but that's still good enough to make it really deep. And you've got Novak as well, who lost early here, but that's not a big deal because he always kind of does lose early here. Lost to Davidovich Fokina last year at this tournament. You watched one clay Masters 1000 event, Bush. Mm-hmm. Has your outlook for RG changed at all? Are you looking at things a bit differently now that you've seen our first glimpse of high level competitive clay tennis of the year?
No, not at all. I think the people that we still expect to be at the business end of the clay court season, I think, still hold true. I was actually pleasantly surprised by how good Dino Medvedev looked in this week. Admittedly, that loss was, had its own things that we could get into. Yeah. But I thought he looked good against Sonego, and I thought, in general, the week has gone pretty much as expected, with the exception, of course, is that Holger Rune is, man, he's very, very good. Yeah. He's really, really good.
The draw is becoming more of a minefield, and I'm comfortable saying, like, I was looking at the entry list at Barcelona, and the tours are spread out. I think they're in Stuttgart, and then there's a tournament in Bosnia and Herzegovina as well, and Novak will be there, Rublev will be there as well, and Rune and Zverev are going to the BMW Open, because of course they are, and then you got the rest of the guys in Barcelona, but someone's going to get drawn. Someone's going to get a match a little too early than they would have liked. And I'm willing to say this. I feel more comfortable now than saying that there's going to be a pretty seismic upset early on at RG. I'm not saying who, because I that's how you hedge. And that's how you can maintain the aura of being a pick master. But not to say they're on the WTA level yet of parity, but I do feel like the draws are going to be a lot more interesting to observe, because there is enough now to feel comfortable maybe selecting a few more guys to challenge.
Firmly sitting on that fence is Devang Desai.
If Nadal plays and wins again, though, shame on us. Shame on us for even pretending to have this conversation again. Okay, we got to talk Billie Jean King Cup. We got to talk some other Monte Carlo stuff. Do you want to try and fit in Joker Musetti before we get to the break? Your boy, Lorenzo Musetti, conquering some demons, perhaps. He was absolutely gassed the next round and got blitzed by Sinner, but didn't choke at the end against Novak. That must have been good. That must have felt really good considering where he's been at.
You know who did choke in that match?
Novak Djokovic.
Novak Djokovic did. Yeah.
Did he? Or was he like, do I need to be here anymore? I got other things to do.
My house is just around the corner. I need to go and eat my caviar somewhere.
I saw Pog say this in the Discord. He's like, this could be the new future, or a match in this future of Nole going out in the round of 16 at multiple tournaments. But I do think belief is half the battle against these cats. And even though it was a 3-setter, file that one away for, can I actually do this at a later moment, perhaps a bigger moment?
I have clearly been on record a lot in belief in Lorenzo Musetti of how good I think he can be. And I think if you're looking to buy that stock, this victory against Novak Djokovic is clearly an indication of how good he can be on clay. If you're not looking to buy stock, you can certainly look at what happened in the following round against Jannik Sinner and just being absolutely wiped off the court. And I did write this in our Discord, and it was said somewhat tongue-in-cheek, but it is kind of a fascinating thing to look back to back at the rally pace and the ball pace between Novak Djokovic and Jannik Sinner, and how much time Musetti had to maneuver the ball around the court and use his craft and use his guile and use his defensive abilities, and also create winners and shots out of nowhere, and then just got completely smothered and could not handle the ball coming consistently at 100 miles an hour at him. And it is kind of fascinating to watch those two things back to back, because Novak Djokovic has made a living out of being able to redirect tennis balls. And then when it doesn't happen and he goes up against someone who is very capable of not doing that and not giving him anything, he looked a bit lost. He looked a bit drunk when he was off balance. And it was actually kind of funny to watching someone being like, well, I thought you were supposed to hit the ball on the lines, dude. Like, look, greatest of all time. What's going on here?
Someone who is probably the best side-to-side mover ever looking off balance is always like, what's going on? And I saw there was a clip of him in practice, perhaps aggravating an arm injury during a stretch. That could be something, I don't know, that's talked about. But Novak can dictate and he can generate his own pace, but I wonder if he's ready to do that at this stage, considering he's been in this hiatus, this self-induced hiatus, not being allowed to play many of the tournaments so far this year. So again, file it away because I'm ready to believe. All right, let's get to the break. When we come back after it, we'll talk about Daniil Medvedev and Alexander Zverev and their beef, which I thought was very illuminating for many reasons. And then, of course, it's the Billie Jean King Cup qualifiers. Canada getting the job done in Vancouver. Doing it the hard way, but getting into that final in November. We'll talk about it all coming up next. Welcome back to the Open Air Podcast. I mentioned we're going to stick in Monte Carlo for a bit longer. A lot of drama on the court. I mentioned Holger Rune becoming public enemy number one. Also, look who Holger Rune played, Bush, along his route to the final. Played Dominic Thiem. Well, everyone's cheering for Dominic Thiem in that match. Didn't play Berrettini. They would have been cheering for him. Daniil Medvedev, maybe a push there, but I think Daniil's got his backers. Jannik Sinner, definitely not the crowd favorite. A fair amount of Italians in there as well. And then Rublev, not his luck for his terms of drawing against maybe someone more hateable than him. But that wasn't the only drama we saw. In fact, we saw Daniil Medvedev and Holger Rune kind of have a laugh at one Alexander Zverev's expense, because Alexander Zverev and Daniil Medvedev had it out. The source of the anger, Bush, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is that Zverev was not happy at the timing of Medvedev's bathroom breaks during their encounter in the round of 16, a match that Daniil would end up winning 9-7 in a third set tiebreak. That is the source of this, correct?
That is the source of this continued beef, but perhaps it is, on this occasion, the bathroom break is the vehicle of the ire, but I think this one runs quite a bit deeper. If I was to take a guess, it is not really about the bathroom break.
It's bigger than that, man.
Not to speak too out of turn on this one, but I would suggest that there are other things going on beneath the surface.
Much are made of Zverev's quotes, including this one. He is one of the most unfair players in the world. I take fair play and sportsmanship very serious. He does not. I mean, wow, that's a pretty loaded charge to drop at someone's feet. But the response from Daniil, one of the better press conference responses of all time, mixing in some French there as well. But I think, what do you think is the best answer here, Bush? There's quite a few things.
Sasha is not this guy. Sasha is not like Casper. He's not like Diego. He's not like Andre. When he says someone is not fair play, you're like, okay, great. Look at yourself in the mirror.
Bang! Mike Breen drop, Greg. Let's drop a Mike Breen bang in there. My goodness. Some other good stuff. Sasha's living in his own world. I already had like 5 players in the locker room come to me and say, come on, Daniil, why are you so unfair? Smiling as if to say, look at this clown. Can you imagine him saying that? It's fantastic. And again, Daniil Medvedev, love him or hate him. And I get I guess his haters would point to maybe his on-court actions and some of his rude outbursts, I would say. But I'm firmly in the camp of backing him at all costs. And his response to Zverev being quite mad and throwing his toys out of the pram was excellent. Zverev has to be, and maybe a Dominic Thiem aside, and maybe there's someone else, but who is rolling in Alexander Zverev's crew? It cannot be a large list, rightfully so.
And absolutely, it should not be the case. The lack of self-awareness, I think, is kind of fascinating. And I think they have interesting parallels. Of course, we've chatted on this podcast previously about how Alexander Zverev and and Rune have a lot of similarities in terms of personality and in terms of how they hold themselves off court and in terms of some of the stature they hold themselves in, or at least the vision of themselves, which I think is kind of interesting of how you get to the top of the game. Similar upbringings as well, you would kind of argue as well, in terms of just being that golden child and coming up in a federation and being someone who has been primed for glory since they were like 3 years old or whatever it's been. In short, I mean, we gave the treatment to say that we thought that Holger Rune was a prick in segment 1. I don't think this is an example. I don't think we needed to be proved anymore.
Yeah, we don't think regarding AZ. It's known. And I found the remark about how Daniil, and he went out of his way to say Daniil and his wife are not friends with Alexander Zverev, which I thought
shocking
was
that.
Yeah, and Daniil Medvedev follows Olia Sharapova on Instagram, which was also pointed out in our Discord. So I think, as you said, there's probably a lot more to this story that we saw in Monte Carlo, but I thought Daniil Medvedev once again tells it exactly how it is in his mind. And whether you like it or not, I think it is fascinating that the two vanguards of this, I would say, on the ATP are two Russian guys who the ATP will have an interesting time marketing. I don't want to say marketing, but I want to say promoting, because they should. They really should, if you look at it on that basis.
Yeah, I think so. I think Zverev just seems dumb. Like, it just seems incredibly thick in terms of how he holds himself. And like that lack of self-awareness, I think, comes with age. But I also think you should probably be getting there by the time you're in your mid-20s. I think we all come to it at different speeds. And I think it's easy to sit here, midway through my 30s and say, why don't you have any self-awareness? But goodness me, dude, why don't you have any self-awareness? Fucking hell.
It might not ever come. That's the thing. Holger Rune, maybe it will. I have hopes. I once again said I have hopes, but yeah, maybe they're unfounded. One more note on this. Stefanos Tsitsipas taking to Twitter, as he usually does, to congratulate Andrey Rublev with, I think, congratulating Andrey Rublev. The tweet, he deserves it. He is a good kid. I believe Stefanos is younger than Andrey Rublev. So what is that about? Who is he even talking about? It's not exactly clear. What a guy.
Certainly had his moments this week, did Stefanos Tsitsipas. His comments or writing on the camera made no sense at all. And still not convinced he's not an AI bot somewhere in there.
Tennis is looking a bit AI body at this point in terms of breaking and not exactly doing what it was supposed to do at some points. But Fritz and Steph had a funny back and forth. This is the personality of the tours, but once again, people blatantly acknowledging lies and calling them out is fantastic in my book. So go on, Daniil, keep going. Okay.
Remember the good old days of the Basketball Jones when they used to argue whether or not a specific player in the NBA was either a cat or a dog.
Yeah.
Whether they had more cat-like or dog-like tendencies, and then going into the breed of said dog. I mean, this dude, Stefanos Tsitsipas, is just a golden retriever, is he not?
Big time. Massive. I also think Daniil's a cat, by the way. Is that fair?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I completely agree. Cat versus dog segment at some point has to be done in the top 10. We have to do that.
We'll drop it. All right. The Billie Jean King Cup, Bush. We'll admit, the format, what this competition has been called, much like the Davis Cup, it has changed and been tweaked, and people are quoting the wrong stats and the wrong winners, and we're all just vibing as we try to get to the final in November, which I do not believe has a venue yet, but 12 nations will take part, and Canada is one of them, thanks to their exploits in your backyard, Bush, at the Pacific Coliseum. Canada 3, Belgium 2, Canada, no Bianca Andreescu, obviously, after her injury. Rebecca Marino was ill during this event, causing her to be withdrawn from her final singles match. But I think the story here, Bush, is Leylah Fernandez putting Canada on her back. Of course, Gabby Dabrowski is a phenomenal doubles player, and having someone to partner with like her to play in that all-important final match, it's pretty damn great. But I think Leylah is the story for me, and Leylah, whose ranking now kind of limits her in terms of where she can play, because there's not as many WTA events. I listed off all those ATP events that are going on this week, but there's fewer WTA events, and that also means that I don't think Leylah will be in Stuttgart to play there. That's a shame because once again, I mean, is there anyone else who would want in your corner for these kind of do or die matches?
Certainly not in Canada, right? I think.
Yeah, that's true.
One of the interesting points on this one as well is her teaming up with Gabriela Dabrowski to win in that match against Belgium. Leylah Fernandez is ranked higher in doubles than she is in singles now.
Interesting.
Almost inside of the world's top 40 in doubles. And she's a very, very good doubles player.
Yeah.
I think this season has had some really good results behind that as well. If you're looking at the trajectory of it, I think she has the potential to win a Grand Slam in doubles. Like, I really do. Like, you watch her play, her movement's excellent. She's obviously very consistent. Her serve's very good despite her, like, small stature. It's interesting that's a trajectory that we look at her now, where her ranking has swapped in on the different disciplines. But yeah, almost inside of the world's top 40 in doubles and outside of the top 50 in singles. So interesting to look at.
The team they played in that doubles rubber, by the way, Flipkins, Greet, Meenan, no slouches. I know Elise Mertens was not there, but this is a formidable Belgium team. That's a strong win for them. Elsewhere, the United States absolutely trounced Austria 4-0. They had a very strong crew, including Coco Gauff and Jess Pegula. I just do want to point out, Bush, Jess Pegula taking to Twitter to admonish someone working at an airport restaurant for not making her a quesadilla to her liking because they were out of cheese. I think the idea, and here's what I'll read this actually, because I think it's worth saying. I'm at Qdoba in the airport and I really wanted a quesadilla. I get up in line and he says we ran out of cheese. I look over and I'm like, what about that cheese? He said that's only for the bowls. I'm like, but it's the same. I don't care if you can use that cheese. He says, no, that's our last bin of cheese for the bowls. I told him, but it's the same. Someone is just going to use the cheese. He just kept saying, but it's our last amount of cheese for bowls, so we can't use it. I ended up getting a bowl with cheese and left confused. Is it just me? I think it's just you. I think the need to broadcast this interaction with a minimum wage worker at an airport is my least favorite thing about Twitter. And that's saying something. But is the idea here to generate some praise or a conversation about the lack of cheese options at Qdoba? Ask yourself that question, Simon.
Why on earth is she tweeting this?
Why does anyone tweet anything? This is the problem. This is the damn problem, sir. I had to bring that up. I'm sorry. Really, it was grinding my gears. And
what a bizarre thing to come out and tweet midweek following a very strong week for the nation. You have 55,000 followers.
She's a billionaire.
And you're the daughter of a billionaire.
She's literally a billionaire. She's a billionaire, man. I don't know. Again, this is how you win friends and influence people on the internet. You pile on randoms who you can't see or name. Wonderful. Anyways, back to the BJK Cup, which I did want to point out. France absolutely smoking Great Britain in Coventry. An away tie result. But I looked at the French team. They were very strong. You had Caroline Garcia, Elise Cornet, both in action there. No Raducanu, who's going to play in Stuttgart. I wonder if she makes a difference here. Probably not.
No, not against the team that they played. The French were miles better than them here. Caroline Garcia absolutely dummied Harriet Dart in that first set, and it wasn't really close. This French team has the potential to win this tournament, I think, just given the depth that they have. And we've spoken about it before of like various different nations. I was actually talking about to Josh in our Discord about this a while ago, of just how many players inside of the world's top thousands do all of these nations have on both the ATP and WTA side. And France is just like,
it's nuts.
It's nutso of how much the depth is they have both in men's and women. So it really is not a surprise that they are at the business end of these tournaments consistently.
Always fascinating when these countries match up, though. One of the slam countries, because you get maybe a peek under the hood of the infrastructure. Not to say this is an indictment on the entire tennis federation of GB, but yeah, I think the French depth is astounding. And man, I don't think I've seen a tie in which the first 5 sets of them all went to tie breaks, but it wasn't like it was completely obliteration on the early days, but that was really exciting. The Katie Bolter, Caroline Garcia match as well was well played. But France is through. I think elsewhere, though, everything else kind of played to plan. Brazil losing with Haddad Maia, a bit of a surprise, but Germany, maybe not top heavy, but they've got a lot of depth as well. Poland, no Iga Swiatek, got wrecked by Elena Rybakina and company. Who Kazakhstan might be worth a flyer push as well in the finals, considering it's Putintseva and Rybakina on that squad.
Yeah, and the other thing to note on that Kazakhstan team as well is that blue that they are in is fantastic.
Very nice.
A wonderful shade of blue. And it really put one of my passport holding countries, Great Britain, to shame. Like that navy blue that they were wearing, get out of here.
It was grim.
Really
it also hit a lot better than watching Mikhail Kukushkin in that Kazakh turquoise. It was a lot better than that, I'll say, in many ways. Anything else Billie Jean King Cup related, Bush? Saying it quickly is one of the hardest things I've had to do on this podcast, so I'm proud of myself for not bottling that several times. But the final is in November. The format, much like the Davis Cup, I don't know if this is better or if this can be better, really. But it does feel like team tennis, international team tennis, is in a bit of a weird spot right now where no one is quite sure how to market this and make this feel important. Davis Cup no longer controlled by Gerard Piqué, so maybe they'll do something different.
You think there's any potential of having those team tournaments combined together for the men and the women, or is that just a step too far?
But that would be a surefire way of generating the most coverage, I think, by a mile. Those events that happen in Australia, if they weren't in the time zone they were in, I have a feeling they would be widely viewed, because I think there is a lot of hunger to watch crossover and mixed doubles, especially between the best players. I think the problem is you don't really see that often, maybe slams aside. But yeah, I think there's a market there, and it's not like the tours haven't combined before, but they do it very maybe not infrequently, but they got to get their own shit together on both sides of things, right? Considering what we've seen, at least in recent years. This has to be part of the plan, though, going forward. Doing something in November together would be great.
Yeah, I agree. I think that would substantially help this tournament. I think the other thing that would substantially help it as well is just like having it available to watch as a starting point on this one. It is so challenging. And at least there was some coverage here in Canada. In Canada, the Canadian tie was viewable at least. But if you wanted to have any idea of what else was going elsewhere, not as much. Also, the rain delays in Monte Carlo caused some interesting viewing problems in Canada as well. But that's a story for another day. Yeah, no kidding.
CFL Plays of the Year were on my screen when it should have been Sinner Rune, man.
Are we nearly in the CFL season yet? When does it run?
We're close.
Must be soon, right?
We're close. The other thing I think is worth mentioning is that the history aspect of tennis and how important it is. They got to keep counting Fed Cup / BJK Cup. They got to keep counting Davis Cup wins. It matters in a weird way. The tie to history and the tie to the past is not the worst thing in tennis. I think there's a lot more things that I abhor more, but it does limit us in terms of thinking about new ways forward.
Well, you look at the comparison, don't you, in the Live Golf Tour of how much they, as an entity, are craving legitimacy by having ranking points awarded to it as a tour, and then comparatively how devastating it would be if any of these team competitions had any of the ranking points or like the win-loss ratios taken away from them, that it's effectively a death nail for it.
Right.
How on earth the Labour Cup actually got itself awarded points, or got it, not points, sorry.
Points.
Got it awarded, yeah, excuse me. Yeah.
It's a bag of On sneakers, let's be honest here. It's a bag of On sneakers.
Yeah, indeed so. Watch this space. We say it how long have we been doing this podcast for? 3 years? And we have seen how many different team competitions, different versions of it, different attempts to make this, and it's not really working overall.
Here's a test for you, sir. Who won the United Cup? Can you remember that? Who won the United Cup? It happened the first week of the season.
Poland win it? No,
they were a semi-finalist, not a bad shout.
Swiatek played with her catch. USA win it?
They did win it. Okay.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, you're a sicko. You're the sicko in the mirror holding yes, watching this stuff. But I don't know if a lot of people could remember that or care to remember that. But yeah.
The real question is if I could actually do the competitors in that. Pretty sure it was Pegula and Fritz, right?
Oh, okay. All right, sir. Relax. Jeez. I didn't need that.
It's like a Sporkle quiz.
I didn't need that. I didn't need that boast. It was Fritz, Pegula, Tiafoe, Madison Keys. But yeah, a lot of the top players there. Again, they did the weird ranking thing where like you had to be in the top 18, or some countries were not represented through a bit of bad luck and misfortune due to injury. But yeah, throw something together in November. The calendar is slightly less stupid, but there are some big events around there, including the ATP finals. But the Davis Cup finals will be on November 20th. So that's like a week before what they're going to do for the BJK Cup. It's got to be a way here. And even if it means that they qualify through separate channels, then they hold a combined event. Perhaps they do it that way.
Yeah, I think or alternatively, you rethink the tour in its entirety and give real runway for it and make it feel prestigious. So it does feel like that fifth major during the course of the year, and that you elevate it as a team competition to give its own space within the middle of the calendar season as well, which we've got so used to. The only thing mattering is Grand Slam wins and wins at the Masters or Premier events, is that it might be nice to actually find some headroom for a team competition to hold some standing for people.
We'll leave it there because that's an excellent point. All right. When we come back, it's parting shots. Plenty to talk about. Nadal, WTA back in China, Boris Becker, all of that coming up next.
Welcome back to the Open Era podcast. As the sun comes out here in Vancouver, we transition to parting shots. Devang, Rafa Nadal, still dead.
Still dead.
Still broken. Will not play in Barcelona. If the warning signs and the red lights were not going off previously, the fact that he missed Monte Carlo, how worried are you that he's even going to make it to Paris to compete for his 93rd French Open title?
Let me rate this out of 5 hips. 5 hips. Okay. 5 hips. Hip being the problem for Rafa this time. I'm 4 hips out of 5 worried. I'm concerned, and it's not. I don't think this is the same. Rafa's kind of slow playing it, and he's kind of lollygagging around, and he doesn't really need to play in all this stuff, and he times it really well. Clearly, there's a problem if he's not playing Barcelona, and also the age thing is not. It's not just like you can throw this out of the window in terms of conversation. It does come for everyone, even the greats. I'm not or would not be surprised if he does play at RG and RG only and tries to give it a go. I also wouldn't be surprised if he says, what's the point? And maybe punts till the summer or just punts entirely. But fool me once, fool me twice, fool me 40 times. I think it's different. I think this is different. Rafa fans, Priyanka in the Discord, I can sense she's thinking it's different. Everyone's thinking it's different. So I'm pretty worried. I mean, if he shows up and wins again, holy cow. But I'm legitimately thinking he won't be either there or a factor.
With all that to say, he will
Congrats
drop 3 sets.
To the 2023 winner, Rafael Nadal.
Got through that first round matchup, taken to a tie break, but other than that, smooth sailing.
Just a counterpoint, Patrick Mouratoglou, the soothsayer, the wizard, the Gandalf of the tennis tours. I don't know if that's fair. It says, quote, Rafa has one goal, to win more Grand Slams than anyone else. He knows that his number one chance is the French Open, and I think he told himself that he wanted to arrive in Paris in the best shape possible. It's harder and harder every year because his body is very worn out. I think his annual training time is going to get shorter every year. So yeah, maybe the pace has changed. Maybe he's now is a new schedule, and it involves a hell of a lot more private stuff and then showing up when it really counts. But I think Fed tried to do that too, and it was a bit of a disaster, if you remember that Wimbledon.
Yeah, that did not go down so well. All I'm saying is keep Hubie Hurkacz very, very far away from Rafa Nadal in this draw.
Far away.
Far. On the other side of the draw, behind the bins, potentially, that far away. Let's transition to another huge story that took place within the last 2 weeks since we were away. Devang, the WTA is going back to China.
Hey.
which I guess we could have seen coming. WTA Chief Executive Steve Simon, in talking to BBC Sport, says, "We have been in this for 16 months, and we are convinced at this point our requests will not be met. To continue with the same strategy doesn't make sense, and a different approach is needed. Hopefully by returning, more progress can be made." I did, when I saw this quote and I saw this article floating around, I did think of Ned Flanders' parents. You got to help us, man. We tried nothing and we're all out of ideas.
Yeah.
It definitely felt that way. Also, further, Steve Simon saying that the great majority, in quotations, of players were in support of a return to China. I will say, were a great majority in favor of return to China, or were a great majority in favor of actual prize money and tournaments coming back to the tour?
Or having more tournaments, or having more tournaments in general. Yeah. I mean, we lament all the time how there is not enough WTA tournaments, and there is probably a relation here. I do think it's a bit skeezy for Steve Simon to be like, well, if we go back and talk to them in person, maybe it'll change things. I don't know. I don't think that's kind of fair.
It's very much the equivalent of what you find with sort of liberal governments, is it not? Right. All around the world, which is like, well, we have to have these billionaires in the room. Like, if we didn't, then what would happen? Like, we have to have, like, Apple CEO in the room when we're making policy, because, like, they would just figure out a way to circumvent it anyway. So what can we do?
I saw an excellent thread. We retweeted it from the Open Air account from Mark Dreyer, who is a Beijing correspondent, China Sports Insider, is in his Twitter handle. But he had a very interesting thread on this, and he says, "Let's be clear, in the 16 months during which the tour claims it suspended tennis in China, it has not missed a single tournament of significance that wouldn't have also been canceled by China's zero COVID policy." So that's another thing to consider, right? Like, they were not going there, but could they have gone there? Is that even now a true protest statement, or it was just a cold reality check for them? Like, oh, we can't even go if we wanted to. So now they're kind of using this as a way to say that they did rest on their laurels and stayed away for 16 months when really they didn't have a choice. So I think that, again, kind of adds on to the ill feeling I have about this, while also realizing Steve Simon's got a pretty tough job on his hands in terms of figuring out what the hell they're going to do financially going forward, right? It's not a small question that they have to answer. The deal with Hology, the partnerships they're making, the fact that venture capital firms are now investing big sums of money into tennis, like, it's time for a plan. And I think the plan here is to go back to one of the few things that maybe was generating cash for them on a consistent basis beforehand.
Is the plan just not going to Jess Pegula's dad and mother and
buy the
asking
tours?
Exactly.
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
The cynic in me is thinking that they've had conversations with as many people as they had or can about alternatives to this, and Steve Simon's like, well, it didn't work. / we can go back now. Have you heard from the Peng Shuai latest is nothing, correct? There has been not much.
As far as I'm aware, absolutely nothing has changed here.
The quote is from Simon: "We have achieved some assurances from people that are close to Peng that she's safe and living with her family in Beijing." Achieved some assurances. We also have some assurances that there won't be any issues with our players and staff while they're competing in China, and hopefully we have received some respect for the stance we took. All right, buddy. All right.
I think it's just an interesting one to sort of analyze and circle, isn't it? Because you did find a tour taking a stance, and the get out from that, or the off ramp from that, is to basically say, like, all right, cool. That's it. Like, just vibes. Like, we're on a vibe level, we think this is fine now. That's basically what's happened here. And it's kind of, you can take issue with this is a policy in general, but like the fact that they chose to do the policy, and then they're out, and then their ability to get out of the policy doesn't have any teeth to it either, is just fascinating to me.
Isn't this like nearly similar, or very similar to removing flags from countries and allowing individuals to compete as neutrals, or neutrals in a small sense of the word, in this year for a lot of those the Belarusian and Russian players? Really, it's a plan of action without really any enforcement or teeth, or you're saying something without really saying something.
Is that not the same as all of the climate policies from all of the wealthy nations in the world? that doesn't actually have any accountability to it.
The other thing Jar says in this thread is that China is a massive part. Like there's 5 Chinese players in the top 60, in the WTA. They went there so much before. The prestige events were there before. Maybe there's not enough money coming in from other places. I don't know. I'm not trying to defend the move, but I do think it's a bit of a grim reality check of where we're at in terms of like what we think the power of protest or an organized stand can do and what it ultimately means when the idea is that we'll have a stronger bargaining position if we do head back and meet them face to face.
Yeah, I mean, this is fascinating in so many ways, right? Because it's caught up in this idea of neoliberal globalized capital as well, to go down that road. The idea that you have all of these interconnected systems in a response to World War II. And the selling point is that if you are in constant trade links or you're constantly in the room together,
bad things won't happen.
You will not see
this
won't happen, right? Like you won't see the rise of fascism. You won't see governments take over and be particularly aggressive against its own citizens. And it's just proven to be incorrect, right? It's just bullshit. Like it's just proven in front of our eyes that it's just complete and utter horseshit. So it's kind of fascinating to see how that as a political project and ideology melds with what we are seeing in our own sport.
Bad faith actors, right? This is what, or how these links get broken down, or why that's this pie in the sky vision of a utopia with everyone joining hands together is not happening, because there are people acting in bad faith and saying things that they don't mean. We'll see what the WTA does here, but fascinating. Yeah, plenty more to discuss. I mean, this year as we get closer to those tournaments. Boris Becker, Bush.
Boris Becker. I will say, sorry, just one other quick point on it. It is a truly staggeringly good PR move. If they knew the entire time
they couldn't go there,
COVID zero,
yeah,
they couldn't go there. Just took the W, and then at the same time were like, fuck it, we wouldn't have been able to show up anyway. Might as well, right?
Oh God, you know how many sports commissioners are looking at that, being like, there should be a PowerPoint deck on this, because that was good.
Such a good job here. Great PR. Well done, everyone. Jesus. Heartland Foundation would probably be giving them tips on that. Yeah. 55-year-old German Boris Becker, tennis great as listed in this BBC article, gave an interview with BBC Sport last week where he was talking about his trip to prison in a long interview. I think it was over an hour or something. It's quite a long time that he was actually interviewed for. I saw bits and pieces of this. He still comes across as an absolute douchebag to me. But it does seem like in a certain amount of ways that he's kind of been humbled, because going to prison is no fucking joke, Dev.
Yeah. That came across pretty clear to me. Boris talking about that experience. So there's no equivalent to until you experience it yourself. He served 8 months of his 2.5-year sentence. I'm not saying he should have served it all, but I do want to see. I want to see what new Boris looks like. He's talking about, I've won the first 2 sets. I've lost the next 2 sets. I'm planning to win that 5th set. What the hell does that mean? I hope to mean just being good and being nice. And if he's still on television talking about tennis, approaching it, I don't know, not better. I don't know what I expect from Boris Becker as a pundit anymore. It's just, maybe it's an analogous or a famous tale for current players. Hey, those assets and loans that you will have to pay, and be careful who you make deals with. I don't know what that service he can provide. Probably that though, because I imagine there's a lot of people hanging around these players, probably offering them deals or contracts and all the sort. And I'm not saying that that's what Boris did or what happened to him, but there's someone who could serve as a cautionary tale.
I don't think Tim Henman gets enough credit for having to sit between Andrew Castle and Boris Becker for 2 weeks through the tennis season in London and commentating on Wimbledon, because by goodness, I would probably have thrown myself off the Thames into the Thames by the end of this whole thing. Goodness me.
Willing to bet that Netflix is making a movie about Boris Becker's time in jail based on this interview. I can guarantee you there's a 3-part miniseries coming, mainly because of this quote in which he says, "You fight every day for survival. Quickly, you have to surround yourself with the tough boys, as I would call it, because you need protection. Boris's Boys coming to Netflix. Yeah, I can see that for sure.
Yeah. Let's throw some more white-collar criminals into jail. That's my takeaway from this.
Hey, you're onto something here. Speaking of white-collar, Time Magazine. Bush, when was the last Time Magazine you bought?
Oh, God, that's a good question. I don't think I've ever bought it. Is Time Magazine still relevant?
they're making copies. They're circulating. I think I can pinpoint it. It was at an airport 20 years ago. Might have been going to India. Needed some stuff to read. I panicked because I wasn't sure if the plane would have in-flight entertainment. So I bought a lot of magazines, and Time was one of them. I can say it.
I remember watching the movie The Secret Life of Walter Mitty, where they had a take on Time Magazine, which was Life Magazine, and had to look up what the fuck it was referencing. So that's kind of my touch point with Time Magazine in general.
Well, they're still doing their top 100 most influential people list, and there is some tennis content on there. Michaela Schifrin, excellent skier who's back doing the damn thing, winning titles after a very tough Olympics.
Breaker?
Yeah,
is that right? Like broke the
I
record
wouldn't
recently?
put my Sport Chronicle hat on. I wouldn't mind doing an episode on her because, man, after the Olympics, people were writing her off, and she was getting just pages and pages of hate mail and really open about it. And then she comes back from that and literally lays waste to her peers in record-breaking fashion. Amazing. Well, I think it's fitting that she's talking about Iga Swiatek then in this essay that was really good, just kind of pointing out what makes Iga an important figure in tennis. And I think I saw Andy Roddick as well talking about how Iga has kind of popped that tennis bubble, and she's getting closer to that name recognition that us tennis heads all seek and crave from our friends and family who don't follow the sport. Do you think she's closer? How close do you think she is to that level? Because I do think things like this do help in that regard.
I think she is top 100 most influential people closer. Is she not? According to Time Magazine.
Just a note, though. Roger Federer wrote the Leo Messi blurb for this as well.
What?
Yeah. Did you read that? Whether or not he wrote it or not, I'm still willing to believe he said this to someone or said a quick voice note to one of his people, and they're like, yeah, throw this together, send it to them. But yeah, he wrote the Messi blurb. We got an Iga blurb. Tennis, baby. We're still relevant, of course.
Potentially Roger Federer sitting there in front of Chat GPT-4.
Oh, wow. I could see that as well.
Quickly needing to have some copy edited.
Can I just I want to say this about the On brand. And again, not a paid ad. No shoes have been received. No gear has been received. But a younger colleague of mine at the office, I saw him wearing a pair of On running shoes. I was like, what? Like, I haven't seen many of these out in a while. And this is like a young, early 20s person. And I'm like, how are these? Raved about them. Absolutely raved about them. They were on sale. Couldn't speak highly of it. This person's on their feet a lot. Perhaps Roger's done it again, Bush.
In all fairness to modern fashion, is it not the case that you make things as universally ugly as you can possibly make them in order to be stylistic and be fashionable?
So or make them comfortable. Or like you sacrifice looks for comfort, which I think these shoes are managing to do.
Those fashion houses would be rolling over in their grave.
My tried and true Puma shoes are tearing at the seams, so I'm in the market, and it could be On running shoes. Hear me out, folks. Ben Shelton, Iga Swiatek, Devang Desai. I think that is the trio you want back in your shoes.
If people are not having their feet bleeding or like having their spines feeling bad or like their ribs cracked from what they're wearing, then I don't want to know about it, right? Let's go down that road.
Moving on, Simon, to Barbara Krejcikova.
Yeah, this quote came out a couple of days ago. Barbara Krejcikova on whether she feels the tension between the Ukrainian and Russian players in the locker room. Quote, Babs, yes, I feel it from both sides, but there are some Russians who create it. They don't speak publicly, but when we see what they do in the locker room, I try to avoid them. Closed quotes.
Yikes.
Who is she talking about?
Yeah. I don't know. I'm hesitant to name names. I mean, there's been actions from a few on the court. Who wore the Spartak Moscow jersey?
Popotova did.
Yeah, right? I can imagine she's probably in that crew. That's a safe bet.
feel like this is how witch hunts start, are they?
Yeah, no, also also
we're heading down dangerous territory here and abort,
I saw quite a bit of Babs press recently. There was an interview as well, just started talking about tennis and like her like love of the game and basically how she sees it. Trying desperately to find the link and I can't, but I'll try and throw this in the show notes. But more Krejcikova, again, more just sheer honesty. Kind of want some names to be named though, because it's not fun just assuming who's doing this and what.
Wonder if this will be captured within break point.
Yeah, Jesus Christ. What are the chances of that, by the way? I guess no.
Zero.
Well, yeah, I guess, they would have been filming, last year. So,
yep. Interesting story on this one. I had one of my colleagues who is not a tennis fan said that he watched the first 2 episodes of Break Point and it inspired him to go and play tennis.
Hey.
Which I thought was interesting.
Wow.
So someone who definitely was not a tennis fan, knew nothing about the sport, but it came across a recommended playlist within his Netflix and it made him go out to the courts. So it's working in some capacity.
Yeah, and I think the way we measured its impact, like on the top 10 charts early on, wasn't very helpful. And I'm curious to see if the next batch of episodes, which should be out soon, if I can remember correctly, I'm curious to see how they land because there's some, I believe Rafa is profiled in one of them, and hell, he'll be a big story in one way or not very soon. All right. Anything else parting shots wise before we get to 2 challenges remaining, Simon?
Nope. Let's get to 2 challenges remaining and let's just hope and pray to all high hell that my colleague did not go out and buy a paddleball racket.
Wow. Padel?
Pickleball,
I guess, yeah. Sebastian Giovinco, Toronto FC legend, is starting a padel team in Toronto, which again...
Is it padel?
I think it's actually called? Paddle. No, I think paddle. Paddle?
It's got to be paddle, surely.
Paddle? I don't think so.
Padel.
Padel. I know, it's a lot of Spanish. I just assumed it was padel. Please correct me on that.
Padel ballon.
Is one of those IG ads that you're like, is this fake? Is this not real? And then it turned out to be real.
Why are you being served ads? Sebastian Giovinco playing paddleball.
It's a sad look into what I'm looking at on Instagram, I guess, right? That's on me. All right, is that your challenge remaining?
It is not.
Shot at Nadal, yeah.
Exactly. I should come up with something different for the purposes of this. I sent you a few days ago, or yesterday, in fact.
Yes.
A link to If Books Could Kill.
Excellent podcast. Yeah.
It's very cathartic listening to the tales of 2 people absolutely ripping to shreds some of the greatest best-selling books that are effectively the things that you would find in an airport lounge from Freakonomics.
Next to a Time magazine. Next to a
Time magazine, absolutely. Yeah, all the way from Freakonomics to, I think The Game is in there, the Neil Strauss book.
Oh, God. Wow.
What else
Can you imagine that The Game ebook was heavily trafficked in my university dorm through email? Like it was on one of those servers, those internal servers that you could get the ebook version of that.
Jesus Christ. Which member of the ATP Top 100 is a former pickup artist? New segment coming in 2 challenges remaining.
That's on the Cats and Dogs episode.
Indeed so. How about you?
I went to the Toronto Blue Jays home opener on Tuesday.
Did? How's the new ballpark?
Honestly, very impressed. And I'm not just saying that to be a company man, but you've been to a place so many times and it just becomes ingrained, right? And you don't really see it that differently. And I've sat in basically every kind of seat you could sit there, and I had really good tickets actually on Tuesday, but everything looked incredible. And the idea that you can go watch a baseball game and not feel like you're at a baseball game is something that I think America has mastered really well from the parks I've been at. And it's not a wild thing to suggest that you might go to a game with a few people who aren't interested in the Detroit Tigers or the Cleveland Guardians. Like, yeah, I want to do other stuff or have a drink or talk to my friends. And that's what they do well, I think, in some of these other places. And I think Toronto now is quite the spot. It was very, very cool. The game, though, man, the pitch clock is one of those inventions that I think will really go down as a game-saving moment for the sport, because a half an hour is a big deal for me on weeknights, or generally when I was working in another gig and having to cover late night baseball games. There was no bigger fear I had than a West Coast game that went to extra innings. No longer, sir. No longer.
What a sport. The only sport in the world that has to make their ballparks more entertaining than the actual product that they're trying to sell, which is very funny.
And they have to make it shorter, make less of this, and make it so we don't have to watch as much. Perfect. I'm convinced, though. It's great.
Jesus, this is so boring.
Baseball is back, baby. Baseball is back. All right. We'll leave it there. Go Jays. Go Jays, go. We are on patreon.com/open era. A lot of our source material or things we wanted to talk about were covered extremely well in the Discord by people smarter than us. So I recommend you join us at patreon.com/open era. Join our Discord chat, get the show ad free, get it early on Sundays. We're also on Twitter at Open Era Pod. We're trying to tweet, mostly retweeting cool stuff that we see. And finally, a rating or review wherever you get this podcast. Seeing nice reviews has been awesome for us as we continue to do this show. So if you like what we've been doing or have done, please drop us a line there. We're also at podcast@openera.ca if you want to leave us an email. I think that's it for producer Greg for the drops and for covering my massive litany of mistakes. Thank you, sir. And for Simon, thank you for listening to Open Era. We'll talk to you next week.